A little girl broke through the dense fog, her screams about her mother hanging from a tree halting a convoy of black sedans. She had no idea she just flagged down Ramon Ortega, a man who ruled the criminal underworld. But instead of moving on, he took his enforcers into the woods and cut the woman down. Now, the predators who did this to a family are about to discover a new hunter in their territory. This story will challenge everything you believe about good and evil. It proves that sometimes the person the world calls a monster is the only one willing to protect the innocent. And it will remind you that true courage is not the absence of fear. It is a barefoot little girl running through the darkness to save the person she loves most. If you need to know what happens next, hit subscribe and never miss a chapter. I have another story you will not forget coming tomorrow. And before you go, drop a comment to tell me where in the world you are listening from. I love seeing how far our community reaches. Now, back to the story. The fog clung to the ground that morning, creeping over the forest road with a mind of its own. It consumed the asphalt in heavy gray clouds, silencing the world and reducing giant pine trees to dark shapes that could have been watching or waiting. The air was cold and sharp in the lungs, smelling of wet soil and moss. The world was still. The world was silent. Then, she appeared. The girl emerged from the mist, looking like a spirit trying to become solid. Her pink dress was torn, smeared with dirt that seemed black in the poor light. She was running barefoot down the middle of the road. Her arms swung wildly, and each ragged breath was a painful tear in her chest. This was not a game. She was not playing. She was running to survive. Her feet made wet sounds on the asphalt, leaving behind bloody footprints that the fog quickly erased. Her dark hair was a tangled mess over her face, and she stumbled once, catching herself on shaky hands before forcing herself back up. The noise of her fall was like a gunshot in the quiet. She kept running until she saw them. Two black luxury cars were parked across the road, their engines humming, with the low growl of powerful machines. They were a complete barricade, as if expecting someone to arrive. Chrome accents shined dimly in the mist. The tinted windows showed only a gray reflection. The cars looked as if they were made from shadow and metal. The little girl never slowed. She did not stop. She ran directly for them, her voice shattering the quiet of the morning. "Help!" The word was ripped from her, raw with desperation. "Please, somebody has to help me." The door on the first car swung open. A man got out, moving with the easy confidence of someone who is always in charge. He was tall with wide shoulders, wearing a black suit over a black shirt with no tie. His jacket was open, showing the complex tattoos that covered his chest and climbed his neck in a language of symbols and images that told a violent story. More ink covered both of his hands, dark against his skin. His black hair was combed straight back from a face that showed no emotion. He had the kind of danger that expensive things often possess. His name was Ramon Ortega, and in the right rooms, that name was a death sentence. Behind him, two other car doors opened with a quiet, synchronized click. Three men stepped out, all in dark suits with white shirts and ties, all moving with the same trained purpose. They fanned out around him, their hands near their weapons, their eyes scanning the fog and the trees like soldiers. These were not his guards. They were his weapons. The girl collapsed as she reached Ramon, her legs giving out completely. She fell to her knees just a few feet from his polished leather shoes. Mud splattered on the pavement as she threw her hands toward him. "They hung my mother from a tree," she cried, the words spilling out in desperate bursts. "Please, you have to get her down. Please." Ramon looked down at the child but did not move. His face remained a mask. He did not bend down. He did not offer a hand. He just observed her with dark eyes that saw everything. The raw burns from a rope that circled her small wrists. The way her body trembled from pure terror and exhaustion. The dirt packed beneath her fingernails, showing she had been digging at something. Or someone. One of his men took a step forward. "Boss?" Ramon lifted a single hand. The man stopped. The only sound was the girl's small, broken sobs. "Please," she whispered, her voice failing. "She is still up there. They just left her hanging. Please." Ramon tilted his head, his gaze still on her, analyzing the situation. The child was not just scared. She was broken by trauma. He had seen enough of both to understand the distinction. "Where?" His voice was low and flat, completely without emotion. The girl raised a trembling hand and pointed into the forest, at a wall of trees that vanished into the thick, solid-looking fog. "In there," she said. "It is not far." I ran. I ran as fast as I could. Her voice shattered. She bent forward until her muddy forehead touched the cold road. Ramon looked at his men. No words passed between them. They were not necessary. The engines were cut, one after another. The car doors shut with quiet, heavy clicks. The three men formed a perimeter around Ramon without a single command. Their hands were now resting on the guns hidden under their suits. Ramon looked back down at the girl. "Get up." The child pushed herself to her feet but swayed, about to fall again. Ramon reached out and grabbed her elbow, his grip firm but not harsh, holding her steady. She looked up at him, her eyes wide and red, filled with a desperate hope that no child should ever have to give to a man like him. "You will lead the way," Ramon said. "We will follow." The girl nodded quickly and turned back toward the woods. She managed 3 steps before her legs gave out once more. This time Ramon did not hesitate. He scooped her up in one motion, placing her on his hip with a single arm. She was as light as a doll. "Hold on," he told her. It was a direct order, not a kind suggestion. She locked her arms around his neck and pressed her face into his shoulder. He could feel her tears soaking the fabric of his expensive suit. He paid it no mind. Ramon walked toward the trees, and his men fell into a tactical diamond formation around him, 1 man in front, 2 at his sides. The forest swallowed them in an instant, hiding them in fog and deep shadow. The path she guided them along was barely there, made more for animals than for people. Low branches grabbed at their clothes. Hidden roots tried to trip their feet. The fog became even thicker, pressing in on them like a living thing. The air became 10 degrees colder within a few yards. Ramon could feel the child's heart pounding against him. It was a panicked rhythm that matched the growing danger in the air. His men were silent, their weapons now in their hands, their eyes alert. They recognized this feeling. They had walked into traps many times, but this felt different. This felt wrong. The path ended abruptly, and the trees opened up like a curtain revealing a dark stage. They were in a clearing, perfectly circular and strangely bare. In the very center stood a huge, twisted oak tree, its branches reaching out like a final judgment. A woman was hanging from one of those branches, swinging gently in a breeze that only existed in that one spot. "Mama!" the little girl screamed. Ramon's face did not change, but his hold on the child grew tighter as his free hand went to his gun. "Check her," he said, his voice a low command. One of his men ran forward. The one who got to Elena Smith first was Victor, a man who had served in the special forces and had seen an impossible amount of violence. But as he put 2 fingers to the woman's neck to find a pulse under her cold skin, his practiced hands were shaking. "She is alive!" he called out, his voice strained. Ramon did not show any of the relief that should have come with those words. Relief was a weakness. Action was strength. He adjusted Maria in his arms, turning her head so she could not see her mother hanging lifelessly from the ropes. "Do not look," he said softly. It was not for comfort. It was a command. Maria pushed her face harder into his shoulder, her tiny body shaking with sobs that made no noise. She had no screams left. Ramon's other 2 men moved with a familiar, lethal grace. One of them, Diego, took out a tactical knife and started to climb the tree, moving like a man who had faced much harder challenges. The other, Mateo, stood directly under Elena, his arms up, prepared to take her weight as soon as the rope was severed. Ramon watched them, his thoughts already moving to the next part of the plan. Whoever did, this was close. The rope burns on Maria's wrists proved she had been tied up. The fresh mud on her dress showed she had fallen again and again as she ran. The terror in her eyes told him that the men who had done this enjoyed making a point. They would still be nearby. They had to be. How long ago? Ramon asked Maria, his voice quiet and steady. The girl looked up, her tear-stained face filled with confusion. What? How long since they left? Maria's eyes unfocused as she tried to make sense of time through her fear. I do not know. It was not long. Maybe. Maybe they are still. Her voice broke. They said they would be back. They said if anybody tried to help them, they would. They are not coming back, Ramon cut in, his voice flat and absolute. It was not a guess. It was a promise. High above them, Diego's knife cut through the last fibers of the thick rope. Ready, he called down to Mateo. Now! The rope snapped with a soft whoosh. Elena's body fell. Mateo caught her with a surprising gentleness, lowering her body to the damp ground. Victor was at her side in an instant, feeling for a pulse, his hands assessing the harm with a doctor's precision. His skills were made for causing pain, not fixing it. The pulse is weak, but it is steady, Victor said, his fingers moving from her neck to her wrists. He studied the deep rope burns that had torn into her skin. She is suffering from exposure and shock. She belongs in a hospital. No hospitals, Ramon commanded. All three men looked at him. They understood not to challenge him, but their silence was its own question. Ramon set Maria down softly, but kept a steadying hand on her shoulder. The girl tried to scramble toward her mother, but he held her in place with quiet force. Not right now. Let them help her. We found her in time to save her life. She stays alive only if you allow my men to do their job. Ramon's dark eyes locked onto the girl's. You can believe me, or not, but if you choose to believe me, then you will listen. Maria forced herself to swallow and then nodded. Her small hand gripped Ramon's coat so hard that her knuckles showed white. Ramon took out his phone with his free hand, dialing a number without looking. The call was answered on the first ring. I need a medical crew, he said, his voice sharp and professional. A woman in her mid-30s. She has exposure, injuries from restraints, trauma, and is in shock. A private location. Be there in 20 minutes. He paused, listening to the other end. No, send them to the safe house on Riverside, not the clinic. He ended the call, put the phone away, and turned his attention back to his men. Diego had climbed down from the tree and was now studying the area like a predator, reading the forest floor as if it were a book of broken branches and disturbed soil. Boss, he called out quietly, the tracks are recent. 3 or maybe 4 men, wearing heavy boots, moving northeast. Ramon's jaw clenched just slightly. How recent? Diego bent down, touching the rim of a boot print in the soft dirt. Minutes. They are probably still within a quarter mile. The atmosphere in the clearing shifted. All 3 men recognized the change. This was no longer a rescue. It was something colder, something they understood far better. Ramon looked down at Maria. What is your mother's name? Elena, Maria whispered. Elena Smith. Elena is going to be okay. My men are going to help her. But I need you to wait here with Victor while we go. No. Maria's clutch on his jacket grew frantic. Please do not leave me. They said they were coming back. They are not coming back, Ramon said again. This time, his voice carried a weight that made the promise sound like a death warrant for somebody else. I will personally make sure of it. He gently uncurled Maria's fingers from his coat and led her over to Victor, who had taken off his own jacket to cover Elena's still body. Stay with your mother, Ramon told her. Victor will protect you both. He will handle anyone who comes near that is not one of us. Victor met Ramon's gaze and gave a single, firm nod. His hand drifted down to the weapon hidden under his shirt. Ramon then turned to Diego and Mateo. No words passed between them. None were necessary. The 3 men moved together toward the northeast trail. They left Victor standing guard between Maria and her mother, a guardian angel in a suit, armed with a gun. Maria watched them vanish into the mist, her voice barely audible. Where did he go? Victor checked Elena's pulse once more, his face carefully blank. To deliver a message. What message? Victor remained silent for a long moment, listening to the sounds of the woods. Far away, through the dense fog and old trees, he thought he could hear shouting, which was quickly followed by silence. The permanent kind, he said at last. Maria did not understand completely, but as she curled up next to her mother, feeling the faint rhythm of Elena's breathing, a part of her understood. The part of her that had run through a nightmare on bare feet and had found the one dangerous man she could trust. The forest had taken Ramon Ortega and his men as if they were never there. But the forest would not forget what happened next. Victor worked quietly, his hands moving with skilled purpose over Elena's cold frame. He had seen far worse things, but the sight of a woman hanging from a tree like a warning still made his jaw tighten. Maria sat close to his side, her pink dress stained with mud and wet from the morning fog. Her gaze was fixed on her mother's face. Elena's skin was a pale gray, making her look more like a ghost than a person. Her breathing was shallow and uneven, a pattern Victor did not like. Is she going to open her eyes? Maria's voice was small and hoarse from screaming. Victor took a blanket from his pack and laid it over Elena, tucking it in around her shoulders. She will, just not right now. Her body has shut down to keep itself safe. It is trying to heal. From what? Victor paused. He did not know how to tell a child what it does to a person to hang by their wrists for hours. He could not explain how the blood stops moving, how the muscles begin to tear, how the mind breaks from the constant pain. From being very, very afraid for a long time, he finally said. Maria nodded slowly. She accepted his words because she now knew fear completely. She had been living inside of it for what felt like years. Why did they do this to her? She whispered. My mom never hurt anyone. She just works at the diner. She takes me to school. She reads stories to me at night. Her voice broke. Why would anybody hang her in a tree? Victor had no good reason to give her. In his world, cruelty did not need a reason, other than some men liked to have power over people who could not defend themselves. But he could not tell that to a child whose life had just been torn apart. Some people are broken on the inside, he said instead, and broken people like to break things. Maria thought about this, her small hands twisting the material of the jacket that covered her mother. Is Mr. Ortega broken? Victor's eyebrows lifted slightly. It was a smarter question than he had anticipated. Why do you ask that? Because he never smiled, not one time. And his eyes, Maria searched for the right description. They looked like no one was home. Victor checked Elena's pulse again. It was still there, still weak. He thought about how to answer. Ramon Ortega was many things. He was dangerous, powerful, and completely ruthless when he needed to be. But broken was a complicated word. Mr. Ortega is not empty, Victor said with care. He is cautious. He has witnessed many terrible things, and he has done what was necessary to survive them. That kind of life changes a man. Did it change you? Victor looked into the little girl's eyes and saw the sharp edge that survival gives a person. She was not just making conversation. She truly wanted to know about the men who had appeared out of the fog to save her mother. Yes, he admitted, it did. But you still helped us. Yes. So maybe Mr. Ortega is not broken. Maybe he is just… Maria tried to find the word. Cautious. Like you said. A smile almost formed on Victor's lips. Almost. Maybe so. A noise cut through the quiet woods. It was far away, but clear. A shout. And then another one, followed by the sharp crack of something that could have been a tree branch snapping, or something else. Maria grew tense, her hand quickly grabbing Victor's arm. What was that? Ramon, Victor answered simply. His hand went to his weapon, but he did not pull it out. Not yet. His eyes scanned the line of trees, noting every shadow, every movement in the fog. Is he okay? He is fine. How can you be sure? Because if he were not, we would be hearing a lot more noise than that. Another sound carried through the air. This time it was clearly a voice, crying out in pain or terror, before it was suddenly silenced. The quiet rushed back in to fill the space. Maria's breathing grew faster. They are hurting someone. Yes, the men who hurt my mom. Yes. Maria was silent for a long moment as she processed this information. Victor expected her to cry or be afraid, or perhaps to be confused about one act of violence being met with another. Instead, the little girl's voice was cold and flat, making her sound much older than she was. Good. Victor looked down at her, surprised by the hardness in that one word. Maria stared into the mist where Ramon and his men had vanished. Her jaw was set, and her eyes were like stone. They hung my mom from a tree like she was garbage. Maria's voice began to tremble now, not from fear, but from pure anger. They tied me up so I had to watch. They were laughing. One of them said she stopped, swallowing hard. He said that no one would even care, that people like us are not important. Victor's grip on his weapon tightened. What else did they say? Maria just shook her head. I do not remember everything. There were 4 of them. They had masks on, but I saw their eyes. One had a tattoo on his hand, of a snake eating its own tail. Another one smelled like cigarettes, and something sweet, like a bad cologne. Victor memorized these details without thinking. Ramon would want them later, if any part of the men could be identified. They said they would be back tomorrow to see how things were, Maria whispered. They said it like it was a joke, like seeing my mom hanging there was funny. They will not be coming back, Victor said. The certainty in his voice was so complete that even a child could understand it was the absolute truth. Because of Mr. Ortega. Because of Mr. Ortega. Maria looked back at her mother's unconscious body, at the slow rhythm of her breathing, and at the red marks that circled her wrists like she had been branded. She looked up at Victor then, her eyes seeming to have aged 10 years in a single morning. I am happy I ran to him, she whispered. I am happy I did not run away. Victor replied, Your mother is too, even if she does not realize it yet. A deep stillness had fallen over the forest in the distance. There were no birds, no breeze, and no voices, only the dense, waiting silence of a place where something permanent had just happened. Victor glanced at his watch. It had been 15 minutes since Ramon left. The medical team was 5 minutes out. Elena would live. Maria would live. And deep in the fog, 4 men were learning the true price of cruelty. The sound of an engine broke the forest quiet. The noise was low, powerful, and deliberate. Victor's head shot up, his hand already moving for his weapon, before he recognized the familiar sound of Ramon's Mercedes making its way up the narrow path. Stay put, he told Maria, placing his body between her and the car that was drawing near. But it was Ramon who appeared from the fog first, walking in front of the car as it followed him at a slow crawl. His black suit was immaculate, apart from a few leaves caught on his shoulders. His face was as unreadable as it always was. Yet Victor, who had been with him for 7 years, saw the faint tension around his jaw, the way his knuckles were pale from clenching. Behind him, Diego was driving, and Mateo was in the passenger seat. Both of their faces looked as if they were carved from stone. Ramon's gaze went straight to Elena's still form, then to Maria, and finally to Victor. She is stable but in critical condition, Victor reported. Her pulse is getting stronger. I see no sign of internal damage, but she requires immediate medical care. Hypothermia is becoming a risk. Ramon gave a single nod, then knelt down next to Maria. The small girl gazed at him with wide eyes, looking for something in his face. She wanted answers, comfort, or proof of what she had heard from afar. Your mother is being taken to a secure location, Ramon said, his voice soft but firm. Doctors are going to look after her. You will be with her the whole time. What about the men? Maria whispered. Ramon met her eyes. They will not hurt anyone ever again. There was something in the starkness of that promise, its absolute finality, that made Maria's shoulders relax, as if a great burden had finally been taken from her. She did not ask for details. She did not ask for the story. Some truths do not need an explanation. Thank you, she said, her voice full of air. Ramon rose without acknowledging her words, already turning to help Victor carry Elena. They moved with a practiced, silent coordination. Ramon held her shoulders, and Victor supported her legs, gently placing her in the back seat of the Mercedes. Diego had already laid out more blankets on the leather seats, creating a makeshift bed. Maria, get inside, Ramon said, keeping the door open. The girl quickly climbed in, instantly settling beside her mother and taking hold of Elena's cold fingers with her small hand. Ramon got in after her, his large body consuming the rest of the space. Victor took the front passenger seat while Diego stayed at the wheel. Go, Ramon said plainly. The Mercedes reversed with remarkable speed down the tight path, Diego's hands sure on the wheel despite the dangerous ground. Branches scraped against the windows like the fingers of skeletons trying to stop them. The fog was thick around them, limiting visibility to less than 10 feet. But Diego had navigated worse paths in worse weather. His focus remained fixed on the trail. In the back, Ramon checked Elena's breathing, his fingers placed gently on her wrist to feel her pulse. It was faint, but it was there, and it was steady. The human body could be incredibly strong when given a chance. Maria observed him with a focus that might have seemed strange if Ramon was a man who cared about being watched. Are you a physician? She asked. No. I have seen enough wounds to know when a person will recover from them. And my mother will recover? Ramon's dark eyes met her own. Yes. The power in that one word seemed to calm something deep inside Maria. Her hold on her mother's hand eased a little. The terror that had pushed her forward for hours was finally starting to fade. The Mercedes left the forest trail, reaching the main road and accelerating with a smooth, instant power. The fog began to thin as they drove away from the trees, and the morning sun fought to break through the gray clouds above. What is the estimated time? Ramon asked. 12 minutes, Diego answered, his foot pressing down harder on the gas pedal. The needle on the speedometer climbed higher. Victor took out his phone and typed a quick message. Torres confirms the medical crew is ready. The operating room is prepared if necessary. The blood bank is on standby. Good. Maria's head turned from one man to the other, seeing the flawless way they communicated, how they functioned like parts of the same entity. Where are we headed? You said it was not a hospital. Someplace safer, Ramon explained. A place where the men who harmed your mother have no influence, no power, and no ability to complete what they started. But they, Maria paused, looking back at the forest that was vanishing behind them. They are not going to complete anything, are they? No. The word was a final sound in the air, like a door shutting for good. The Mercedes devoured the miles, its luxury suspension absorbing every bump in the road that would have shaken another car. In the back, Elena's breath started to become a little deeper, her body's instinct to survive kicking in now that she was warm, lying down, and mostly safe. She moved, Maria said all of a sudden, her voice filled with hope. Her fingers, I felt her fingers move. Victor turned around in his seat to see. It is a reflex, her nervous system is beginning to function again. That is a positive sign, but she is not waking up. Not right now. It might be hours. Her mind requires time to come to terms with what occurred. Sometimes the body recovers more quickly than the brain will permit. Maria took this in, her thumb gently rubbing her mother's hand in slow, steady circles. Will she recall what they did? Probably, Victor answered with honesty. But memories become less sharp over time, particularly when you live through them. I will remember also, Maria said softly, Forever. Ramon glanced at her, his face showing no emotion. Yes, you will. Is that a bad thing? It will depend on what you choose to do with that memory. Maria thought about this, her young brain trying to understand ideas that most children are never forced to face. What am I supposed to do with it? Survive. Become stronger. Ensure that no one can ever have that sort of control over you again. It was not a comforting thought. It was not a therapy session. It was the harsh, practical view of someone who knew that trauma could either break a person or make them. And that decision, no matter how unjust, was always left to the one who survived. We have arrived, Diego said. He turned onto a private road lined with trees that led to a large estate, protected by high walls and iron gates that swung open as they came near. A medical crew was there at the entrance, 3 people in scrubs with a gurney and bags of equipment at the ready. The Mercedes came to a smooth stop. The doors opened in a practiced order, and Elena Smith, still unconscious but with a steady breath, was moved into the care of people who knew how to bring her back from the brink of death. Maria began to walk after the gurney, but Ramon's hand on her shoulder stopped her gently. Let them do their work first. 5 minutes. After that, you can be with her for as long as you need. Maria nodded, her eyes following her mother as she was taken through clean white doors. She was still alive. They both were, and that was all that mattered. The safe house was a place of opposites. It was luxury built around total security. It was elegance that hid a capacity for violence. Crystal light fixtures were hanging above screens for surveillance. Polished marble floors shone under weapon cabinets that were concealed by fake walls. This was the sort of location where men like Ramon Ortega managed affairs that were never recorded in any official books or legal files. Maria was sitting in a large leather chair in the study, her muddy shoes hanging a few inches from the Persian carpet. A person had brought her a cup of warm tea she had not touched, and a blanket that she held around herself like a shield. Through the open door, she could watch the medical staff work with purpose around her mother in the next room. Ramon was by the window, a phone to his ear, his voice quiet and measured. Victor had gone somewhere deeper inside the house. Diego and Mateo stayed outside, standing watch like a pair of silent guards. Yes, Ramon said to the phone. Absolute privacy. No police involvement. No documentation. A short silence. Because I am telling you to. He finished the call and put the phone away, turning his focus to Maria. The young girl looked back at him, her eyes having witnessed far too much. She understood very little, but her trust was absolute. Your mother is in stable condition, Ramon stated. The doctors are stitching up the cuts on her wrists. There will be scars, but she is going to recover. Maria gave a slow nod. Can I go to her? Soon, they are almost done. The door flew open. Victor came in with a determined stride, his face looking more grim than before. He was holding a tablet computer in one hand, and he offered it to Ramon without a word. We have an issue. Ramon accepted the device, his gaze moving across whatever was on the screen. His jaw tightened just a little, the only visible reaction to the information he was taking in. Show me. Victor touched the screen, and Maria saw Ramon's expression as he processed something she could not see. The air in the room seemed to grow colder by several degrees. When? Ramon asked. While we were on our way here, Diego discovered them in the clearing after we were gone. He had captured fresh prints photographing the entire area before the medical personnel showed up. Ramon returned the tablet, his mind already calculating consequences and formulating plans. He looked at Maria, then shifted his gaze back to Victor. Get her to her mother. Do not leave either of them alone. Victor finally grasped the real reason for the command. It was for protection, not a sign of disrespect. He offered his hand to Maria. Come on, your mother has been asking for you. A light came into Maria's eyes. She is awake, though just barely, and she wants to see you. The little girl leaped from the chair and clasped Victor's hand, throwing one last look toward Ramon before vanishing through the doorway. Ramon waited to hear the door to Elena's room latch shut before he spoke. Diego, he said, his voice level. The man materialized in the doorway almost instantly, as if he had been anticipating the call, which he had. Let me see everything. Diego produced his own phone, flipping through a sequence of images. He had acted with systematic precision. I returned after we placed Elena in the vehicle. I wanted to record the scene in case we required proof down the road. He presented the phone. Ramon accepted it, his gaze sharpening as he examined the pictures. The clearing appeared altered in the photos, less mystical and more like a crime scene. The huge oak tree filled the screen, with the rope still hanging from its branches like a severed arm. However, the ground revealed the true narrative. There were dozens of boot prints. Some were old and pressed into the mud from the first assault, but others were new, deep, and deliberate, cutting across the clearing on a path that led away from the tree. These were not here when we got here, Ramon stated. It was not a question. No, sir, I am positive. I inspected the entire perimeter when we first arrived. These marks were made after we departed. Somebody came back. Ramon swiped to the following image. It was a close-up of the prints with Diego's tactical knife laid next to them for scale. The boots were large, with heavy treads and military-grade soles, the type worn by men who anticipated conflict and prepared for it. 4 distinct patterns, Diego went on. 4 different individuals. They came from the northeast, the same way the initial assailants had fled. They paused at the tree, probably found the cut rope, and then fanned out to search. Yes, sir. My guess is they were searching for the bodies of their associates. When they did not find them, they gathered here. Diego swiped once more, displaying a dense pattern of prints near the oak's thick trunk. They stood in this spot for several minutes. You can see how the ground is more churned up, as if they were arguing. Ramon analyzed the picture, his strategic mind piecing the scene together. 4 men coming back to discover their comrades had vanished. No sign of a struggle, no bodies, just a vacant clearing and a severed rope. They would have questions, and men seeking answers often resort to dangerous measures. They followed our tracks, Ramon murmured. Diego gave a grim nod. They tracked us all the way to the main road. I discovered prints near the spot where we had parked the vehicles. They would have noticed the tire tracks and the direction we traveled. Did they continue to follow? It is unknown. I could no longer find the trail on the paved road. But, sir, Diego paused, which was a rare occurrence for him. They are aware someone interfered. They are aware their plan was compromised, and now they are searching for the person responsible. Ramon handed the phone back, his face like a mask of ice. How many did we leave behind in the forest? 3 have been confirmed. The 4th got away during the initial clash. He started running before we were able to restrain him. The description is a man of medium build. He had on a red jacket. He moves quickly. Mateo managed to wound him with a shot, but he reached a vehicle we did not know was there. It sounded like a dirt bike. Ramon remained quiet for a long time, weighing the variables and assessing the risks. 4 men returning to the clearing suggested the original team was larger than they had realized. They were organized and coordinated, the sort of group that did not accept losses without a fight. And they were now aware that someone had intervened. They will retaliate, Ramon declared at last. Against whom? They do not know our identities. They know someone cut Elena down. They know someone rescued her. And they have enough information to return and look for them. Ramon's gaze drifted to the closed door where Maria and her mother were waiting. They will check the places she might go to for safety. Her apartment, her job, the people she is close to. We have her here. She is safe for the moment. But we cannot house her indefinitely, and they will be patient. Ramon's jaw tightened with resolve. No. Being patient allows them to reorganize, to strategize, to call for more people. What do you propose? Ramon locked eyes with Diego, and in his stare was the cold logic of a man who had forged an empire through decisive action. We are going back tonight. We will find them before they can find us. Diego did not crack a smile, but a look of satisfaction settled on his face. I will instruct Mateo to prepare the full gear. This is not going to be a simple discussion. Understood. As Diego departed, Ramon went back to the window, gazing out at the perfectly kept gardens that concealed nothing more sinister than costly plants. The forest held the memory of what had transpired in its depths. Tonight, it would be given more to remember. The hunting cabin was located 3 miles northeast of the clearing. Concealed by a thicket of pine trees and reachable only by a dirt path that had been neglected for years, it was the sort of place people went to vanish, either by their own decision or by force. Smoke drifted from a rusted chimney, a gray smudge against the evening sky. A golden glow seeped through the cracks of the boarded-up windows. Inside, voices escalated and subsided in a tense argument, broken by the sound of beer bottles being opened or furniture being struck. Ramon watched all of this from the edge of the woods. He was crouched in complete silence 50 yards away from the building. Next to him, Diego surveyed the area with night vision binoculars, while Mateo moved to cover the rear exit. They had positioned Victor at the safe house with clear orders. Protect Elena and Maria no matter what. This was a different kind of mission. This demanded a unique level of concentration. 4 targets are confirmed, Diego whispered, his breath a faint cloud in the chilly air. All of them are carrying weapons. I can see 2 rifles. There are probably more that are out of sight. They are on edge, a lot of pacing, a lot of yelling. Ramon observed the cabin with the patience of a predator. The building was old but sturdy, made of thick logs, with few windows, a main entrance, and a back door. It was a good place to defend if you were expecting an attack, but a trap if you were not. They are afraid, Ramon noted softly, and for a good reason. They returned to find their friends had disappeared, not just gone, but completely vanished. No blood trail, no bodies, no clues. That is worse than finding dead bodies. At least dead bodies provide some answers. Through the openings in the shutters, Ramon could see figures moving, men pacing and gesturing wildly. Was her property. A single shadow stood out from the others, owning the space with a posture that radiated violence. He was their leader, the one who made the calls. We could just burn the place down, Diego offered. A dry old cabin like this would ignite in seconds. It would be too loud, too obvious. The smoke would bring unwanted eyes. Ramon's gaze remained fixed on the building. We go inside. We seize control. We teach them the consequences of hanging innocent women from trees. Diego put down the binoculars. You need them alive? I need them to give me answers first. After that, Ramon left the thought unfinished. He didn't have to. Mateo's voice came through the earpiece, a quiet crackle. I am in position. The rear exit is covered. No sign of movement on this side. Ramon tapped his own earpiece. Wait for my signal. No one gets out. Understood. Ramon checked his sidearm, a pistol with a matte black finish worn smooth from years of becoming a part of him. Diego did the same. Made more commotion than this. Their actions were fluid and precise. They had been through this before, though not frequently, as Ramon preferred constructing empires over dismantling petty criminal rings. But there were times a point had to be made. There were times the woods required a payment in blood. On my count of 3, Ramon instructed. They moved through the trees like ghosts, covering the remaining ground in moments. Ramon's plan was brutally simple. No sneaking, no tricks. He walked directly to the front entrance and kicked it open with enough power to rip the rusted hinges from the doorframe. The door crashed inward. Inside, 4 men scrambled to their feet, their hands instinctively going for guns they would never reach. Ramon crossed the threshold, his pistol level and unwavering. Diego entered right behind him, his weapon covering the right side of the room as Ramon took the left. Stop, Ramon said softly. The single word hit with more force than a shout. All 4 men froze, their hands suspended in the air near rifles leaning on the walls or handguns shoved into their belts. These were hard men, with scarred faces and cold eyes, the type who thrived in places the law could never touch, but they knew death, the moment it entered their home. The biggest one, their leader, was standing by a beat-up wooden table littered with beer bottles and a worn map. He looked to be in his 40s, with a heavy beard and a tattoo of a serpent devouring itself on the back of his left hand, the exact one Maria had described. His eyes went wide, not because he knew Ramon, but because he recognized the kind of man standing before him. A professional, calm, utterly resolute. "Who in the hell are you?" the leader asked, but his voice lacked the force his words tried to convey. "I am the one who cut Elena Smith down from your tree," Ramon answered, his tone flat. The air in the cabin grew instantly colder. The four men shot looks at each other, a mix of alarm, confusion, and the slow dawn of understanding. "That was none of your concern," the leader said, his hand creeping toward the pistol on his hip. Diego's gun moved by a mere fraction of an inch. The motion was almost imperceptible, yet no one missed it. The man's hand froze. "You strung up a woman from a branch and made her child stay and watch," Ramon stated, his voice remaining quiet, completely under control. "You made it the concern of everyone. She had a debt. Owed to who?" The leader's jaw clenched and unclenched. His gaze flickered to the other three men, one near the fireplace with a red bandana tied around his neck, a younger one with a badly healed scar on his cheek at the table, and an older man with gray in his beard who was leaning against the back wall. None of them looked ready to volunteer information. "I am asking you a question," Ramon said. This time his voice held an edge that seemed to shrink the room around them. "To who?" "Castellano," the leader finally admitted. "Victor Castellano. She was a waitress at his club, took money from the till. $3,000 over 6 months. Ramon took in the information. Victor Castellano was a second-tier player, a man who ran protection schemes and backroom card games on the eastern edge of the territory. He was insignificant, but cruel. The sort of man who substituted raw brutality for real influence. And Castellano hired you to set an example. He hired us to deliver a message. You do not steal from the family." "The family," Ramon echoed, a hint of dark humor in his expression. "The only family Victor Castellano belongs to is not one I know. He is a leech that preys on people who are too weak to defend themselves." "And just who the hell are you?" the leader asked once more, his fear now giving way to anger. Ramon took a single, deliberate step forward. It was only one step, but it caused all four men to go rigid. "I am the person who is about to explain something to you with great care," Ramon said. "And you will pay attention, because your survival hinges on you understanding every word I am about to say." The cabin became utterly still, the only sounds being the hiss of the fire and the low moan of the wind in the pines. "You made an error tonight," Ramon said. "A terminal one." The man in the red bandana shifted his feet. "Listen, we were just taking orders. You hanged a woman from a tree." Ramon's voice sliced through his flimsy excuse. "You subjected a child to terror. You were laughing as you did it. How could you possibly know that? Maria explained everything to me. Every single detail, every word that you spoke." The men glanced at each other again, this time with open worry. If the child had spoken, if she got away, if she found someone with power, the leader's face grew hard. "Then you are aware we were sent by someone with more pull than us. If you kill us, Castellano will hunt you down." Ramon's expression remained unchanged. "Let him come." The silence that followed his words was stretched thin, like a wire about to snap. The leader's face grew darker, his anger fighting the part of his brain screaming that he was at the edge of a cliff. "You believe you can simply enter this place? I am already here, Ramon." Cut in, his voice perfectly level. "Now, you will answer my questions. How many of you were present when you put the rope around Elena Smith's neck?" The leader's jaw was tight. "I am not telling you a thing." Diego's pistol shifted, its barrel now aimed squarely at the man's heart. The intent was unmistakable. 7. The young man with the scar blurted it out, his voice thin and cracking. There were 7 of us in total. The leader threw him a look that could kill, but the information was already out. Ramon's gaze shifted to the young man. Their names? I do not know all their names. Yes, you do. The young man swallowed, a visible lump moving in his throat. He looked to his friends for any sign of support, and found none, quickly deciding that talking might earn him a few more seconds of life. Me, I am Tommy. He is Jake. He gestured to the leader. Red bandana over there is Chris. The old one is Pete. The other 3 who are gone are Vic, Danny, and Mitch. Where are Vic, Danny, and Mitch? Ramon asked, even though he knew the answer. The silence was thick and heavy. They never made it back from the forest, Jake finally said, his voice strained. You are already aware of that. Whatever you did to them, they got precisely what they deserved, Ramon replied flatly. The same kindness they gave to Elena Smith, which was nothing, Diego added from his position. Jake's hand twitched toward his gun again. It was a reflex, not a plan, the final desperate move of a trapped animal. But Ramon was quicker than reflexes. His pistol fired once, the report a deafening crack in the small room. The bullet struck the wooden table just 6 inches from Jake's hand, throwing shards of wood into the air. Everyone froze. The second one will not miss, Ramon said, his voice so calm he might have been commenting on the weather instead of discharging a firearm. Sit down. All of you. For a second, nobody breathed. Then Pete, the older man by the wall, slowly eased himself into a chair by the hearth. Tommy was next, his hands slightly raised as a sign of surrender. Chris, the one with the red bandana, paused for a moment before dropping onto a small stool near the window. Jake was the only one still on his feet, pure defiance on his face, though fear was visible in his eyes. Sit, Ramon said again. Or else what? You will shoot me? You are planning on doing that no matter what. Perhaps. But if you sit, you have a few more moments to convince me why I should not. Jake's laugh was sharp and empty of humor. You are not here to talk. You are here to tie up loose ends. I am here, Ramon stated, because a little girl ran down a dirt road in her bare feet, pleading for anyone to help her mother. And when I discovered that mother hanging from a branch, with rope digging into her skin, I decided what type of men get to walk away from an act like that. He let the words hang in the air. You are not those men. The cabin was silent once more, but for the sound of the fire. Outside, the forest was now completely dark. Mateo's voice came through Ramon's earpiece, all clear on my side. No activity. Jake finally took a seat, but his body was still wound tight like a spring. Castellano told us what to do. We did it. It is the way this life operates. Following an order does not excuse you from the choices you make, Ramon answered. You had 100 other ways to deliver your message, but you picked the most monstrous one. You picked terror. You picked forcing a child to see her mother die. She had to remember it, Jake argued. That is the entire purpose of a message. You make it unforgettable. You make it permanent. Then this will be permanent, Ramon said without raising his voice. What is about to happen here? This is the message that will last forever. Chris spoke from his spot by the window, his voice trembling just a little. Hey man, we had no idea anyone would make a fuss. Elena Smith is a nobody, just some waitress who got greedy. In our business, actions like that have consequences. In my business, Ramon said, hanging women from trees has consequences too. Tommy, the youngest one, could not keep it in anymore. I am sorry. Okay, we will leave. We will inform Castellano that the task is complete, that she is dead. Whatever you require, we will vanish. You will not see us again. Diego let out a sound that might have been a laugh if it had any trace of humor. Ramon observed Tommy for a long while. The young man was maybe 25. There was still a fear in his eyes that had not yet been replaced by the hardness that defined the others. But he had been present. He had been a part of it. Feeling regret is not the same as being innocent. Elena Smith is alive, Ramon stated. Her daughter is alive. They are now in my care. This means the message Castellano intended to send was a total failure. Jake's expression contorted with fury. Then, he will simply send another team. Do you believe protecting two nobodies is worth starting a conflict? I do not start conflicts, Ramon answered. I finish them. He took out his phone with his free hand, his weapon remaining aimed at Jake. After a few quick taps, he angled the screen so the men could view it. It was a photograph. It showed grainy security footage of Victor Castellano walking into a restaurant in the city center. The timestamp was from 3 hours ago. Your employer is unaware of today's events, Ramon said. He is unaware that you were unsuccessful. He is unaware of my involvement. At this very moment, he is eating dinner, making arrangements, completely ignorant that his entire enterprise is on the verge of ruin. You cannot get to Castellano, Jake said, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. He has connections, protection, people who… Everyone has connections until they are gone, Ramon cut in. Everyone believes they are untouchable until someone touches them. He put the phone away and stood up straight. This is what is about to happen. I am going to present you with a choice, which is more than you offered Elena Smith. The four men stood waiting, holding their breath. Option 1. You tell me every detail about Castellano's business, his locations, his partners, where he stores his money, and who shields him. You provide every single detail, and perhaps, just perhaps, you will leave this place alive. And option 2? Pete inquired from beside the fireplace. Ramon's expression remained unchanged. There is no option 2. Jake gave a bitter laugh. So it is not a choice at all. It is a better choice than you gave a woman pleading for her life while her daughter was forced to watch. The weight of that statement struck them like a physical force. Even Chris turned his head, a hint of shame or something similar showing on his face. The clock is ticking, Diego said quietly. Tommy was the first to give in. Castellano works out of the Paradise Club on 7th. He has a warehouse in the industrial zone where he hosts card games. And shut your mouth, Jake yelled, jumping to his feet. Ramon's weapon followed his movement instantly. Sit down. We are dead either way. Do you not understand that? If we talk, Castellano will kill us. If we do not talk, you will kill us. There is no escape. There is always an escape, Ramon said. Sometimes it is just more difficult to find than you would prefer. Dawn was arriving when Ramon got back to the safe house, coloring the sky in shades of gold and red that felt wrong after the night's events. Diego was behind the wheel while Mateo sat in the back, cleaning his firearm with a practiced calm. No one said a word. Everything that needed to be said was already understood. The cabin deep in the woods was silent now. The forest reclaimed its peace, and four men who believed they were untouchable had just learned the ultimate lesson about consequences. Ramon had made the decision he always made when justice and mercy were on opposing sides. Some boundaries should never be tested. Victor was waiting at the entrance, his face a neutral mask, but his eyes held the questions he would not ask in front of the others. Ramon gave a barely perceptible nod, a signal that the necessary work had been finished. Nothing more needed to be said. What is the status? Ramon asked in a low voice. Elena is conscious, she is lucid, and she is asking for her daughter. Victor paused for a moment. She is also asking for you, Ramon took off his suit jacket, seeing the grime on the cuffs and a small tear near the shoulder. He passed it to Diego, who vanished to get rid of it. Certain evidence simply should not exist. Maria, who had fallen asleep in the chair next to her mother's bed, refused to go. She has not moved since you left. Ramon acknowledged this with a nod as he walked through the ornate corridor toward the medical area. His steps made no sound on the marble flooring, a lifetime of practice making stealth an instinct. He stopped at the slightly open door, watching for a moment before going inside. Elena Smith was propped up on pillows, her wrists covered in clean white dressings that looked stark against her pale skin. An intravenous line was attached to her left arm. One of the medical aides had washed and braided her dark hair. She appeared frail but was clearly, undeniably alive. Maria was sleeping, curled up in the large chair next to the bed. Victor's suit jacket was draped over her small body like a protective blanket. Her face was calm in her sleep, as the terror had finally faded from her expression. One of her hands reached across the narrow space between the chair and the bed, her fingers linked with her mother's. Elena's gaze met Ramon's in the doorway. She did not startle or look away. She simply observed him with a focus that implied she was trying to understand how the man who saved her was also a man who could do such terrible things. Ramon walked in without a sound, shutting the door behind him but not locking it. You never corner yourself in a room with no way out. Mr. Ortega, Elena's voice was firm. Mrs. Smith, please, call me Elena. There was a brief silence. Maria explained what took place, what you did for us, and what you are doing now. Ramon went to stand by the window, keeping his distance to give her space, but remaining close enough to hear. She should not have been forced to tell you anything. She is just a little girl. She is my little girl. And she saved my life because she ran to you. She saved your life because she was courageous enough to seek assistance. I was simply the one who was there. Elena made a noise that could have been a laugh if it were not so painful. You do not seem like a man who ends up anywhere by chance. Ramon did not disagree. The real story was more complex. He was driving back from a business meeting in the Northern Territory, using secondary roads to stay away from traffic and unwanted notice. The thick fog, the deserted road, the precise timing. Maybe it was destiny, or maybe it was just a matter of odds. He had no faith in a higher power, but he understood the laws of probability. The men who did this to you will not be coming back, Ramon stated plainly. Elena's eyes scanned his face. Because you killed them. It was a statement, not a question. Ramon neither confirmed nor denied it. His silence was the only answer she needed. Good, Elena whispered, and a core of steel was evident beneath her weakness. I hope they were in pain. They were made to understand their error before the end. Elena nodded her head slowly, absorbing the information. Her grip tightened on Maria's hand, an involuntary reaction from a mother who had almost lost her entire world. What is going to happen now? She asked. Maria told me we are in your care. But what are we being protected from? If those men are dead? They were employed by someone named Victor Castellano. He dispatched them to teach you a lesson over a debt he said you had. Elena's face lost all its color. $3,000. I never took it. My register was short 3 times, and he accused me of theft. I told him I would pay him back. I would work more shifts, whatever it took. But he insisted that a message had to be sent. Castellano will not be sending any more messages. You are going to confront him again. It was another statement. I plan to have a discussion with him about rethinking his methods of operation. That is not a discussion, that is… Elena cut herself off, glancing at her daughter's sleeping form. Will Maria and I be safe? Yes. How can you be so certain? Because ensuring safety is something I am very skilled at. Elena watched him for a long time, this threatening man dressed in expensive attire, who emerged from the fog like a character from a grim fairy tale, a beast who had rescued them from other beasts. Why? She finally questioned. Why did you help us? You have no idea who we are. We mean nothing to you. Ramon remained silent, thinking about how to respond to a question he had asked himself on the drive back. Why did he pull over? Why did he get involved without a second thought? He had constructed an empire on calculated moves, cold logic, and strategic planning. Compassion was not a part of that design. But then he saw Maria's expression, the fear, the hope, and the desperate belief that somebody, anybody, would care enough to do something. My sister was 8 years old when she was taken, Ramon said softly, the words catching him by surprise as much as they did Elena. He rarely mentioned Sophia, and never to people he did not know. Someone heard her, but nobody helped because they did not think a poor girl from the slums was worth taking a risk for. Elena's look changed, a wave of understanding washing over her, which was disappointing in how common it was. I was 14, Ramon went on. I was too young to do anything about it, too weak to make a difference. I made a promise to myself that if I ever gained power, I would use it in a better way. That if I saw someone helpless being harmed, I would be the one to make it stop. And you have honored that promise, whenever I am able. Maria moved a little in her sleep, muttering something unclear before becoming still again. Both adults looked at her. Her childhood had survived a horror, but she would bear the scars of it for the rest of her life. Thank you, Elena said in a whisper, for pulling over, for hearing her, for giving me my mother back. Her voice cracked. Ramon gave a single nod, uneasy with her gratitude. He did not do things for thanks. The outcome was always more important than the credit. You will remain here until you have fully recovered, he stated, shifting back to practical details. My associates will find new housing for you in a place Castellano's organization cannot touch. New identities if you need them, a clean slate. We cannot pay for. It is taken care of, Mr. Ortega. It has been handled, he said again with finality. Think of it as compensation for information. You were an employee at Castellano's establishment. You are familiar with his business, his routines, and his vulnerabilities. That knowledge is extremely valuable. Elena saw what he was doing. He was offering her a way to receive his help without it feeling like charity, letting her keep her dignity while he guaranteed her safety. She nodded her head slowly. I will tell you everything I can remember. Later. For now, you should rest and recover. Ramon started toward the door, then stopped. Elena, what was done to you? It was not your fault. You did not deserve any of it, and the men who did it will never harm another person again. Because of you. Because they chose the wrong person to harm. He was gone before she could answer, shutting the door quietly behind him. Victor was waiting in the corridor, his arms folded across his chest, his expression impossible to read. Castellano? Victor inquired. Tomorrow night. I need complete surveillance on him, his entire schedule, every single person he has a meeting with. When I go to see him, I need him to be alone. Is that understood? Victor paused. Boss, news about the cabin will get around. Let it. 3 days went by in the safe house as if time itself had stopped. Elena regained her strength, the healthy color returning to her cheeks, and the shaking in her hands slowly went away. The medical staff lowered her dose of pain medicine, told her to take short walks, and examined her healing injuries with approving looks. Maria stayed close to her mother's side at all times. She would jolt awake from bad dreams, fighting for breath, her hands searching in the dark until they found Elena's. Only then could she breathe easily again, remember that she was secure, and drift back to sleep. Ramon came to see them twice a day, in the morning and in the evening, for short visits that were never longer than 5 minutes. He would inquire about Elena's progress, make sure Maria had everything she needed, and then leave to attend to whatever matters occupied his days. He never lingered long enough for them to become comfortable, never let closeness weaken the essential gap between the rescuer and the rescued. On the evening of the 3rd day, Elena requested to speak with him alone. After Victor took Maria to the kitchen for dinner, Elena was left alone with Ramon. The medical room had become her whole world. She was strong enough to sit up by herself now. Her bandaged wrists lay still in her lap, a quiet symbol of her surrender to things she could not control. I gave Victor everything I have on Castellano, Elena said, starting the conversation. His habits, his allies, every official he bribes, and all the places he feels secure. Everything. Ramon nodded slowly. I am aware. Victor updated me. Then you have what you need, she stated. You do not need us any longer. Her voice was not angry, just matter of fact. She was a woman who had learned that her value was tied to her usefulness. You are not here because you are useful, Ramon said gently. You are here because you are healing. We cannot stay here forever, Elena replied. This is not our life. We do not fit in with marble floors and private security. She gestured at the expensive room around them. This? Then where do you belong? The question seemed to startle her. I am not sure anymore. My old apartment is not safe. Castellano knows that address. The diner where I worked has the same issue. No place feels secure right now. That is why you will go somewhere new, he told her. Somewhere his influence cannot find you. And how will I live? I am a waitress with a high school diploma and a child to support. A new beginning costs money that I do not have. Ramon had already thought about this. Victor has found a job for you, he explained. It is a restaurant management role. It has a good salary and benefits. The town is quiet, about 3 hours north of here. Maria is already enrolled in school. The first and last month of rent for an apartment are already paid. Elena simply stared at him. Why would you do all this? Because it is not a rescue if you only survive to face a new kind of struggle. But we are strangers. You have no obligation to us. I do not operate on obligation, Ramon interrupted. I operate on completion. I began a task when I took you down from that tree. This is how it is completed. Elena's eyes grew moist, but she shed no tears. She had cried enough in the last few days to last a lifetime. What will happen with Castellano? She asked. If he learns that we are alive, if he connects you to this. He will not be connecting anything, Ramon answered. The complete certainty in his voice made Elena pause. You are really going to handle him. I am going to have a discussion with him about changing his priorities. What occurs after that will depend entirely on his ability to listen. Maria asked me if you were a good man or a bad man, Elena said in a soft, reflective voice. I did not have an answer. What did you say to her? I told her that you were the man who saved our lives, and that sometimes that is the only thing that counts. Ramon thought about that. Good and bad were ideas for people who had the privilege of not knowing violence. He stopped thinking in those simple terms the day Sophia was taken from him. Now he only believed in actions and their outcomes, in cause and in effect. Your daughter is very brave, he said at last. She moved toward the danger in order to save you. That type of courage is uncommon. She should never have needed to be brave, Elena replied, her voice breaking a little. She should be concerned with her schoolwork, her friends, and normal problems for an 8-year-old girl. I failed her. You made it through. That is not a failure. I am the reason she was there. My debt. My decisions. Castellano's decisions, Ramon corrected her firmly. His choice to make things worse. His command to make an example out of you. You did not put yourself in that tree. You did not inflict that horror on your daughter. He did. Elena listened, wanting to believe him, but fighting the heavy weight of a mother's guilt. She felt she should have protected Maria from ever seeing something so terrible. When do we go? She asked in a low voice. Whenever you feel ready. In a few more days, I think. The doctors need to be sure no infection develops. They need to know you can get by without them checking on you every day. And then we just vanish? We start again as if none of this occurred? You do not forget, he told her. You do not pretend it did not occur. You build something new on top of the old. That is what survival is. The sound of Maria laughing drifted in from the kitchen, genuine and bright. It was the sound of a child remembering how to be a child. Both adults turned toward it, like plants leaning toward the light. She really likes Victor, Elena remarked with the hint of a smile. She follows him everywhere asking questions. He has a lot of patience with her. Victor has children, Ramon explained. 2 daughters. He understands. Does he understand what you do? Who you are? Ramon met her gaze. He understands that the world has dark corners, and that at times, the only thing that can stop a monster is someone willing to be even more of a monster. Is that what you are? A monster? I am whatever I have to be. Elena studied him. He was a puzzle, a man who had entered her life at its lowest point and somehow became the reason she had a future. She wanted to understand him, to define him, to make sense of a man who lived by a set of rules all his own. Perhaps she did not need to understand him. Maybe all that mattered was acceptance. "Thank you," she said, her voice clear. "It does not matter who you are or what the future holds. Thank you for not leaving us. Thank you for hearing my daughter when you could have just kept driving." Ramon rose to his feet, ready to go. He had already stayed too long and spoken more than was safe. Emotions were a complication. Distance was clean. "Maria came to me because she had nowhere else to run," he explained. "But her instincts were correct. Some lives are worth saving, and some people are worth the danger it takes to save them." Ramon stopped in the doorway. "Yes." He was gone before Elena could say more, before her gratitude could become an obligation, before his mercy could become a bond. In the hall, Maria almost ran right into him. Victor was just behind her, his face apologetic. "Mr. Ortega." Maria's expression filled with pure, simple happiness. "Victor showed me how to play a card game. I beat him 3 times. He probably let you win," her mother said. "He did not," Maria insisted, but then she looked at Victor with a flicker of doubt. He kept his expression perfectly neutral. Ramon nearly smiled, very nearly. Instead, he rested a hand on Maria's shoulder for just a moment, the only sign of affection he would permit. "Look after your mother," he told her. "I will." "You are leaving now, but will you be back?" Ramon looked down at the brave, wounded child. She had run through terror and fog to save her mother. She had put her faith in a dangerous man's compassion and had been rewarded. "I will be back," he promised. It was a bigger promise than he normally made, bigger than he should have. But some promises, once spoken, could not be taken back. The forest road appeared different in the daylight. It was less threatening, less strange, just a road cutting through normal trees under a normal sky. The mist was gone, and everything was sharp, clear, and unfamiliar. Ramon stood next to his Mercedes as the engine hummed quietly. Inside the car, Diego and Mateo waited, allowing him this final moment by himself. Victor had remained at the safe house with Elena and Maria, providing the constant security that had become their new normal this past week. 1 week. That was all it had been since a small girl appeared out of the fog and altered the course of several lives with 6 terrible words. "They put my mom on a tree." Ramon glanced toward the edge of the woods where their journey had started that morning. The path was still visible if you knew what to find, marked by trampled plants and snapped twigs. But the wilderness was already beginning to heal, hiding the proof that anything out of the ordinary had happened. The forest held its secrets. Victor Castellano would now hold his forever. The talk Ramon had promised took place 2 nights before, in a private room at the Paradise Club. It had been short, to the point, and it ended with Castellano knowing precisely how his business would be different from now on, which is to say, it would be over. The club was now closed, locked up, and silent. Castellano's whole organization had fallen like a deck of cards once his influence was removed. The people he had once tormented were now quietly celebrating their freedom. The police did not ask about his abrupt disappearance. Some people disappearing simply makes a place better. Maria and Elena were set to leave today. Victor was going to drive them to their new place, get them situated, and make sure they had what they needed for a fresh start. Ramon would not be there to say goodbye. Farewells led to attachments, and attachments led to problems. He had already said what he needed to say. The rest was just action. His phone vibrated. It was a text from Victor. "They are asking about you." Ramon replied, "Tell them I had to handle business. Tell them to stay safe." A moment passed. Then, Maria says thank you. Elena says she will never forget. Ramon put the phone away without another word. Memory was a certainty. People never forget the things that break them or the things that save them. Elena and Maria would hold on to this forever. The trauma and the rescue, the terror and the kindness, were now tangled together so tightly they could never be pulled apart. That was the price of surviving. You had to carry it all with you. A second car, a plain sedan driven by one of his men, pulled in behind Ramon's Mercedes. The woman at the wheel gave a respectful nod. She had her instructions. She knew the job. Keep an eye on the road. Look for anyone taking too much interest in this spot. Report anything that seems wrong. The forest would be under watch for the next month, just in case. Ramon got back into his own car, settling into the rear seat. Diego's eyes met his in the rearview mirror. Back to the city, boss? Yes. The Mercedes drove off smoothly, putting the forest road behind them. Ramon watched it shrink in the back window, that piece of road where everything and nothing had changed. He had rescued 2 people, ended the lives of several others, and taken apart a small criminal enterprise. He had also created a small void of power that another person would surely try to claim. The world moved on. The girl is going to be all right, Diego said softly. It was not a question, but it was not quite a fact either. She is strong. Stronger than any child should need to be. Just like someone else I know. Ramon gave no reply to that. The parallels between his own youth and Maria's were there, but they were not perfect. When Sophia died, he had no one to run to. No stranger emerged from the mist to offer him safety and compassion. He was completely alone. Maria was not, and that was the only thing that mattered. The city skyline began to appear, towers of glass and steel and 1,000 problems that needed Ramon's attention. Business does not stop for acts of kindness. Empires need constant supervision. People relied on his judgment, his power, and his readiness to do things others would not. But as the Mercedes joined the flow of traffic and the forest vanished behind them, Ramon noticed an unfamiliar feeling settling inside his chest. It was not satisfaction, and it was not peace, but it was close to both. He had honored the vow he made to himself as a 14-year-old boy. He saw a helpless person being hurt, someone who mattered even if the world said she did not, and he made it stop. Sophia would never know, but it was still important that he had done it. His phone buzzed once more, showing a picture from Victor. It was Maria and Elena in front of a new apartment building. Maria had a huge grin on her face, while Elena's smile was cautious but hopeful. The little girl was holding up a sheet of paper with big, neat letters. "Thank you, Mr. Ortega." Ramon looked at the picture for a long time. Then he saved it and turned the phone off. Some things did not require a reply. They simply needed to be. "Diego," Ramon said in a low voice. "Yes, boss. If anyone asks you what happened on that road in the forest, the answer is nothing. We were not there." Good. The Mercedes took them deeper into the city, returning them to a world of strategic plans and managed violence, a world where power was kept through fear and calculated cruelty. Ramon would go back to being who he always was, a man that sensible people feared, respected, and kept their distance from. But somewhere 3 hours to the north, a little girl would have a future, knowing that when it counted most, a dangerous man chose compassion over convenience, and her mother would be there to see it. That was enough. The forest road behind them was now empty, awaiting the next car, the next event. The oak tree was still there, its limbs reaching out. The marks from the rope were still there if you knew to look. But the evil was gone. The violence had been met with justice. The world, in its own flawed way, was balanced again. The road held the memory of it all. It always would. But a memory without a consequence is just a story. And Ramon understood that history is written by those who are still around to write it. Elena and Maria Smith were still around. That was the only story that mattered. Thank you for following this journey to its very end. You are what makes these tales feel real. This story carries a powerful message. The world is not simply divided into good people and bad people. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. And sometimes, the bravest hero in the room is the smallest person in it. An 8-year-old girl with bloody feet and a heart full of love, outran her own terror to save her mother. That is the kind of courage that changes everything. If this story moved you, do me a small favor. Hit that like button so more people can find it. Leave a comment and tell me, who was your hero in this story, Ramon or Maria? Share it with someone who needs to hear that even in the darkest moments, help can come from the most unlikely places. And if you have not already, subscribe so you never miss the next chapter. I promise you, the next one will keep you up at night. If you want to begin another intense story, simply click on the next video. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful lessons and thought-provoking stories to our audience.